Can everyone see my slides? Okay, thanks, Linda. So I titled this session, Everything You Want to Know About Research Ethics Approval, the Research Ethics Approval Process, but we're too afraid to ask. For those of you that don't know me that well, I'm a co-site lead here with Deryk Beal. I'm a clinician scientist, speech language pathologist at the BRI, an assistant prof at U of T, and I'm been a member of the Research Ethics Board at BRI for a few years, and am now the current chair of the board. So even though this is supposed to be a brief presentation today to allow us time for lots of meaningful discussion, I wasn't sure where we would all be with our understanding of the research ethics review process. So I have a very brief overview of that. And then I want to share with you some insider tips about the Research Ethics Board, the Research Ethics Office, and how those two relate to each other, at least at my institution, the approval process itself, best practices, and then of course we'll have time for discussion. So hold on, I'm just gonna change my screens right here, guys. So the research ethics review process itself is, initial and ongoing review and monitoring of research involving human participants to ensure ethical acceptability, right? And this comes from the Tri-Council policy statement, which all REBs in Canada related to health research are going to adhere to, and academic research. It requires independent evaluation of proposed research by an independent committee of people with varied backgrounds who use their knowledge and expertise to examine the research study from the perspective of prospective participants. And I'll shed some light on the nature of the independence of the committee when we talk about the board itself. And of course, we do all of this guided by respect for human dignity. And I think that's what's most important to keep in mind as you're designing your research. Although interestingly enough, at an institution like Holland Bloorview, where much of the work that we do would be considered minimal risk, other than the fact that we're working with vulnerable populations, a tip I'll be sharing, in different format, from different angles throughout, is that oftentimes it's not ethical issues per se that is holding up the work through the ethics review process. Oops, hold on, guys. So the core principles of human dignity are laid out in the TCPS2, which I've put the link here below. I think all of us are familiar with the document. And if you're conducting research of any kind with humans, and again, there's going to be a human slant on this because I don't have to oversee research with animals in my institution, you're going to have done the TCPS2 training, potentially as well as other trainings through the city program. But essentially, you're looking at the core principles of human dignity being defined by TCPS2 as respect for persons, concern for welfare, and justice. And these are the core principles we keep in mind as we review an application for research from an ethics point of view. So a little bit about the Research Ethics Board. And I felt this was important to share because even into sort of my early appointments at University of Alberta, and even when I started here, I'm probably putting some of my own bias on this, thinking back to my early days, but I felt that I never had a clear understanding of the distinction between the board itself and the ethics office and how those work. And I think, sharing that with people who maybe are having that same experience if you're at the earlier part of your career might help to give you some insight into the process and some of the hiccups that can occur along the way. So as I mentioned previously, the Research Ethics Board is an independent committee established by the hospital, university, and school board. It provides independent ethics review of the research involving, at my institution, humans only. I think important to understand is the board stands independent of the institution that you're with. And, if you're very interested in this, you can take a look at the terms of reference for your board at your institution, which would most likely be posted on your REB's website. But essentially, you can see that the governance of those boards stands separate from the institution that you're at. Of course, there are aspects that are intertwined, but in order to ensure that there are no conflicts of interest, the board has the authority to approve, reject, request modifications to, or terminate any proposed or ongoing project at the institution that it's associated with, regardless of intervention from any administrative or clinical or scientific authority that stands at that institution. And so that's something to keep in mind, that independence is deemed crucial to ensuring that the board can function in the manner that's necessary to ensure the highest ethical standards are adhered to. So, as I just alluded to, the intent of this design is that the board can operate free of any inappropriate influence or conflict of interest. And those terms of reference are going to be available for you to review. I would actually recommend that even if this isn't your greatest interest, that you take a look at those terms of reference, because reading them through really does shed quite a bit of light as to how your board will operate. And it will also list out who your board membership makeup is and give you a better understanding of the backgrounds of the people that are sitting on your board, which might help you to think about how you position your research when you're sharing it with the people on the board, especially for members of the board that come from the broader community and members of the board that are coming without any type of scientific or ethical background at all, but representing the patient and family experience. Oh, did you lose my screen there? Can you guys still see my slides or not?
No.
No.
Okay, sorry about that. I hit escape by mistake. There, I know it's not full screen anymore, but I'll just keep it like this. And so just to give you an idea of the membership that makes up our REB at Hull and Bloorview, and this is going to be fairly common across all of your REBs for human research participants. You're going to have representation on the board from scientific members, members who are experts in ethics, of course, members with experts in health law, and this is health law generally across North America and even globally. So, think of multi-site studies that you might be doing that involve recruitment sites that go beyond our Ontario borders and even beyond our borders into US sites or sites from other countries. So you have to have membership that not only understands health law in Canada, but understands to some degree health law as it changes across geopolitical borders. Same with health privacy issues. A member from the clinical community, of course, and then community members. So most boards are going to hold a common makeup like this, and then depending on the nature of the work that's done at your institution, you could have other board members that split off into the expertise required to evaluate the types of applications that come in related to the science that's done at your institution. Now, the board functions differently from the research ethics office in most cases. At our institution, the research ethics office is there to support the work of the board chairs and the board itself, but is obviously the budget is set by the institution. And so every makeup of the REO is going to be slightly different depending on the institution you're at. our current structure sees that we have a manager of the Office of Human Research Protections, and that Office of Human Research Protections oversees both compliance and the Research Ethics Office. And so that's how things are currently structured at our institution, but it could be different at yours, but there would be some similarities there where maybe the ethics office sits separate from compliance entirely in the reporting structure tree, or maybe it sits under it like it does at ours. Then you typically have a research ethics coordinator, or maybe multiple research ethics coordinators, and then assistants. I think from not only understanding the makeup of your board's individual members and their background, what's also critically important is that you get to know who the either REO manager or research coordinator, ethics coordinator is, and the assistants, because these are the people that you're going to be liaising with on a day-to-day basis as you see your application move through the research ethics approval process. So you really want to get these people on your good side, because they often come with very strong backgrounds in the research ethics approval process. And then depending on the length of experience at your institution, are going to have lots of institutional specific knowledge as well. And these are people where, you can, if you develop a strong relationship with these members of your REO, you can often find that they can carve out time to support you in your preparation of your application before you even submit it, and that they're willing to put that time into helping you with your project, and that can help to head off a lot of small hiccups along the way that could cause potential time delays for reviewing your application related to administrative aspects of your application, and I'll talk more about that in the upcoming slides. I think most research ethics approval processes are going to look similar to ours at BRI. We require a science review before studies are submitted to the research ethics office and ultimately make their way to the research ethics board. And so at the science review stage, if it's investigator-driven research that is funded by a peer-reviewed external grant mechanism, then the peer review can stand as the science review. So you've gone through a tri-council review process, for example. There's probably been at least 1 or 2 times that you've submitted the application, maybe not, but you're going to, regardless of that, you're going to have reviewer feedback, and you're going to have your responses to that reviewer feedback about where you've made the changes in your protocol to strengthen your scientific protocol, or where you've sort of held your ground and said, the reason we've made these decisions about our protocol are for the following rationale. And at that science review step, it actually, even though in many cases it's submitted, sorry, let me backtrack. That science review step happens outside of the REB process at our institution. So that's investigator-led. It's up to the investigator to seek out 1 or 2 scientists, depending on the size of the budget is how we drive it at our institution, as well of whether or not you need 1 or 2 reviewers to look over the protocol, scientific protocol. Or if it's smaller, minimal risk student-led projects, then you can allow your committee notes to stand in place of a science review, as long as there's critical feedback from the committee about the scientific protocol, and then comments back from the student justifying the rationale for the choices that they've made in their protocol, or responding to or pointing out where the changes have been responded to strengthen the protocol overall. What's critically important is, if you choose to allow either an external grant review or committee notes to stand in place of the third option, which is the most straightforward option, the science review form, that we're able to see the back and forth of the critical comments made about the protocol, and then your responses to those comments, because that essentially echoes what would otherwise happen on the scientific review form. And I think most institutions are going to have an equivalent to what we have, which is a science review form that we can give you that walks the scientific reviewer through, letting us know who they are, what their rank is, what their expertise are, and then asking a number of standard questions about the scientific protocol that judge the merit and value of the research question being asked, as well as the strengths and limitations of the methodology proposed to address that question. As well as some insight into the budget and whether or not the budget is sufficient to see the research through to fruition and potential publication if the results are fruitful. So once that science review is processed, it is, as it's led by the investigator in his or her lab, is complete, then that together with the protocol can be used to start filling in the research ethics office approval application, and that you're ultimately going to submit to the research ethics office / our research ethics board. And at our institution, we're very fortunate that we now have an electronic REB process. When I started here 6 years ago, we didn't. We were still paper-based, and there are huge obvious benefits, of course, to that process being brought online now. Although I think you'll find that most electronic REBs are still working through some limitations to submitting things electronically as well. So regardless of whether or not you're dealing with a paper-based process or an electronic-based process, you need to, as a scientist, I think, be understanding and tolerant of some of the technical / administrative hiccups that can come with submitting to such submitting within such frameworks that may or may not have been tailored to a specific type of science that you do. And I think this is where this links back to having, developing a relationship with your research ethics office and the research ethics coordinators and assistants there, so that you can have conversations about ways that process can be improved, or how you can best represent the work that you're doing on the research ethics forms as they're currently presented. Now, even once you've submitted it to, to the eREB, the electronic REB application platform, or even paper-based, handed it into the office, at the majority of institutions, the clock doesn't even start ticking from the board's point of view yet, because it's going to undergo an operations or administrative review by the RI that you're at itself. And so this is an administrator within the Research Institute that is independent of the Research Ethics Board that is reviewing your application for completeness, including the fact that you have a science review done, and that the science review that you've presented is complete, and seeing, that an effort has been made by the reviewer to provide critical comment, and then on your behalf as the research team to respond to those comments in a reasonable way, as well as a number of other, having your I's dotted and your T's crossed, but and then before it's ever signed off on by the VP of research at your institution or their designated signatory. Once that process is done, then it finally lands in the office of the research ethics, on the desk of the research ethics office. And there, yet again, with the research coordinators and administrators, it undergoes yet again another administrative level review, where not only are the research ethics coordinators and assistants looking to ensure that the BRI ops person has done their due diligence to make sure that your application is complete, including science review, but they're often, they're going straight to aspects of the application related to consent and assent, and any Health Canada related documents if it's a clinical trial, to make sure that those approvals, if they're required, those forms and those approvals to make sure if they're required for your application are with that application. Because obviously from an ethics point of view, we need to make sure that we're going to be compliant in a clinical trial, for example, if it's a Health Canada supervised clinical trial with those types of government and other external entities. Also with your consent forms, they're going to be ensuring that you're using the most up-to-date templates and leveraging the template language that's been provided through the institution. So, you know, when you're preparing your own ethics applications, you're going to want to make sure that you're doing all of those things as well, because these are where some of the temporal aspects of the process can really start to lengthen, is if applications have to be sent back at this point because the study team has not used the most up-to-date version of the consent form, or has, you know, deleted legally binding template language that's been devised by the institution that needs to be added back in. When all of that is finally said and done, then the application comes to the board chair, who makes a determination about whether or not the application can go for delegated review or needs to be reviewed by the full board. And at our institution, we do that basically by risk, combined with the nature of the population that's being worked with. And so what sort of determines whether or not something is minimal risk or above minimal risk is a combination of the methodology being employed, maybe the nature of the research that's happening, together with the population that it's being applied to. So sometimes methodologies that might be viewed as relatively innocuous from an ethics point of view, and from the point of view of the ethics board, if they're being applied to potentially vulnerable populations, then that might change the ethical perspective of how innocuous that methodology is, and trigger a higher rigor of review from the delegated review process. If it goes delegated review, then you're often looking at it being reviewed by a board member, as well as the board chair or vice chair. And that can take about anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to happen, depending on what types of external expertise they may need to consult to feel comfortable with having got a thorough review, depending on the nature of the research and then the nature of their expertise. Obviously, you saw the makeup of the board is such that we can draw upon people with several different types of expertise, and each one of, when it goes out for delegated review, there's careful consideration about who the reviewer is that's being approached on the board to lead that delegated review or contribute to that delegated review, to make sure they're able to fill in or respond to sort of where the major ethical issues might appear related to the nature of the work that's being proposed. Or the other route is that you go for full board review. In that particular case, your review is going to happen within probably a 4 to 6 week period, where the entire board has an opportunity to review the document. And then you're asked as a study team, or to send a representative of your study team, typically the PI or the research coordinator leading the work, to come to the full board meeting to have a question and answer period, to work through maybe some of the more ethically complex questions related to the work. And then at the completion of that board meeting, the REO then creates a summary document similar to the delegated review document you would get back, summarizing the comments of the board, and then sharing that with the study team. In either delegated review or full board review, you're ultimately going to end up with a list of comments from the comments and questions from the reviewers that you need to respond to. So not unlike you know, a grant review process or a journal submission for peer review process. And then typically, you know, as long as satisfactory responses are provided, and there's an effort to you know, to make the changes necessary to bring it in line with the ethical oversight of the committee, you're talking about a fairly quick process at that time that is often back in your hands as the study team. to respond satisfactorily to the comments. And then you're looking at approval. Having said that, I mean, the board and the REO has to reserve the right, that if there's major changes made, or if there's been something that was overlooked previously, that it may trigger more of a back and forth at that point. But in my experience, at my institution, given that we engage in a lot of minimal risk work, that tends to be rare. And so that's kind of the broad overview of the approval process. Oh, I had all these nice highlights and animations built in. But what I can do now is now that I've given you that broad overview, I want to go back and sort of share some of the hot tips I have for you guys before we open it up to discussion. So you really want to make sure that you know your institution science review process before you start engaging in it, because that's going to make everything more smoothly. You want to make sure you use all the appropriate forms going through. Your science reviewers themselves, choose them wisely, because if it's determined either at the operations review aspect or the REO review aspect that you didn't engage the appropriate scientific expertise to do a good judgment, that could result in holdups. Okay. Sorry, guys. Oh, okay. Some great tips for preparing your application. One is, if you haven't prepared an application before and you have some sort of electronic process, make sure you create your username and password ahead of time, because on the back end administratively, it could take a couple of days to confirm that and get that back to you. Especially if you do that early, you can get into the system, and I would recommend creating a test application that you never intend on submitting. That can be like your sandbox application, so you can get familiar with the electronic process. Now that we've moved things electronically, a lot of the forms are smart forms that trigger a different decision tree of line of questioning for you, which is advantageous to you as study teams, because if something doesn't apply to your previous responses, you don't have to worry about it. But it can be frustrating sometimes, I think, when you're new to the process, because if you can't sort of see all of the questions you're expected to answer in advance, then you're sort of left feeling like, oh, it can be taken by surprise as questions as they pop up in the form as it goes down. But if you have a sandbox application, you can play with it and get used to that. Another, as I mentioned at the beginning, is, in my experience, a lot of the work is not held up for ethical issues per se, but related to issues where we know further down the line could be an issue for you as the scientific team as it relates to compliance. And this often presents itself in a lack of consistency through the application. We know you've got your scientific review forms, you've got your consent forms describing the study, you've got your study protocol describing the study, and then you've got your description of the study in your answers to the specific questions throughout the REB process. A lot of the feedback that we end up giving at our institution relates to the fact that, as you've tweaked your protocol to strengthen it in response to reviewer comment, it results in inconsistencies between the application and your answers to the questions in the application, the protocol itself, and then what's described to the participants and what they'll be consenting to in the consent form. And so the biggest thing I would recommend that you can do is, before you submit your application, if you state a specific sample size or a methodological approach or a recruitment approach or what have you, make sure that it's the same in every potential component of the application. And this is not the time to wordsmith. Copy and paste from your protocol into your application. If you've got a solid protocol down, and then you copy and paste from that protocol into the application, and you make sure that that's consistent with what's in your consent form, I would say you're going to do away with the majority of the comments that tend to slow down applications. Don't hesitate to get your supervisor to review it ahead of time, or a peer to review your application before it goes in, to try to catch some of those things. And I think I've already talked a lot about sort of the hot tips and things as I walk through without going through my animations. And so what I like to do is leave it there so that we can open it up to discussion amongst the group.